This is the Tuesday edition of Market View, brought to you by Eswatini TV. I am Natalis Tole, glad to be your host this afternoon. Today we take pride in an extraordinary moment as local businesswoman and former Senator Sylvia Mthethwa has been recognized among the 50 most influential African women. As Africa continues to confront a significant gender financing gap, inclusivity remains critical. In a report by the African Development Bank, women-owned businesses in the continent remain underfunded despite their massive contribution to economic growth, innovation and job creation. Therefore, our guest today stands among those championing a new African narrative where women are architects of development. At the African Women Leadership Conference in Sierra Leone, the theme of closing the gender in Africa took center stage. We're honored today to be speaking to the heroine herself on leadership impact and the future of women's economic empowerment in Africa. But first, our business news. In our business stories this afternoon, rising losses in the non-banking financial institutions sector are leaving Eswatini reeling, with several SACCOs collapsing and investors counting heavy losses. In response, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority is tightening its grip on rolling out stronger licensing processing, including the creation of a supervisory committee and an independent licensing committee under Section 6(1)(c) of the FSRA Act of 2010. Speaking during a media engagement forum at Ngonyeni Golf Estate, the Chief Executive Officer Ncamiso Njanjali says the authority is taking bold steps to reinforce its oversight role, including a critical review of the 2010 legislation to give it more enforcement power.
FSRA, in the process, we are refreshing and reviewing our legislation. There are submissions that were supposed to be making to the Ministry of Finance, and some have already gone through to refresh the 2010 regulatory framework. Part of that, and what has been critical, getting assistance from the International Monetary Fund, has been a package around risk-based supervision. What it entails is to strengthen and enhance our early warning systems where regulation and supervision is concerned. For example, we have been going through a round of self-risk assessments with the financial services providers that we are supervising. The intention is to ensure that on their own they can self-assess themselves on the compliance measures that they've done, so that when we get to engage with them on site, even on off-site surveillance, we are at par on the understanding of their compliance obligations. At this point, we have done quite a number of significant institutions already, and we are now looking at ensuring that the pillars or the standards that we have to enforce prudentially in terms of the risk assessments are one that are responding to their operations. What we've seen over years is that the returns that we've been getting from the FSPs, as much as they are part of the legal framework, there have been some gaps in terms of the emerging products and the emerging risk that we see in the spaces. So it has been quite an improvement for us to know offsite that the heat maps around the areas of supervision are in these areas, and then we get close to them. So it does not now, it follows that from legacy issues, we go and do an on-site inspection that covers the wide spectrum of the operation, yet risk-based picks up the sensitive areas that are likely to give us concern quickly, and then we address those ones quickly. The custodians, in terms of our legislations, or trustees, are a third layer in strengthening the regulatory framework. So we have licensed largely all the commercial banks as custodians, and the intent here is the trust deeds that investment or asset managers are using and ensuring that their mandates are sticking to those trust deeds. The custodians are the ones who enforce on our behalf. So, for example, if a fund, a retirement fund, has to place X amount into a particular investment instrument, the custodian is supposed to ensure that those investments are done per the dictates of those trust deeds. So when we come in to do our work, we rely on the custodians as much as we rely on external auditors in terms of their reports. So what we are trying to strengthen now is to make that practice more efficient and more responsible on the part of the pension funds that we're supervising.
The Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, FSRA, Mr. Njanjali, has stated that the authority has taken significant measures to ensure the effective regulation of Eswatini Med. Speaking during a media forum held at Ngonye Nkofi Estate, the CEO explained that these measures are part of ongoing efforts to strengthen oversight and ensure compliance within the financial services sector, emphasizing that the FSRA continues to work closely with relevant stakeholders to maintain stability in the sector and to reinforce confidence in institutions that play a key role in public health and financial well-being.
You will recall that a couple of years back, more focus was placed, and there was some concerns and attention that was arising from consumers around the fund. We did indicate to the public through our press notice that as a supervised entity, there are engagements that the FSRA is doing with Eswatini Med, and we have stepped up of late in terms of bringing the fund under a very close supervisory net. You'll also realize that we had communicated that the Minister of Finance is in the process of developing a legislation that is going to attend and administer aspects of medical aid schemes in Eswatini. That, we believe, is at an advanced stage. A bill has already been produced. We have gone around to seek contributions and inputs from the sector. We believe that the Parliament and Attorney General will be looking at that piece of legislation or the bill soon. What it seeks to do is to ensure that there is a primary legislation that guides the operations and the conduct and the prudential aspects of medical aid schemes in Eswatini. But particularly to Eswatini Med, we have been trying to engage the management of the fund to ensure that we understand the complexities of the model, the solidarity model that operates the fund, because it's a bit different from insurers or from health insurance. So in our aspects, we are ensuring that we want to guide accordingly to the precepts of our law to ensure that they are not operating on an uneven playing field with health insurers. So we have had successes, and they will be engaging more with the regulator going forward in terms of the information that they are supposed to return, in terms of their guidance that they seek with us, and the timing that we are going to be engaging with the fund is of importance to us.
And that is your business brief. Stay with us. Market View continues after this.
Hello to all the viewers of Eswatini TV in the kingdom and beyond. Eswatini TV is regulated by the Eswatini Communications Commission through the Broadcasting Code and Broadcasting Guidelines. Under these instruments, the station commits to broadcasting information and news that have been fact-checked, programs and content in respectful language with no elements of hate speech, violence or sexual activity. If you hear any unsuitable content on this channel, you have a right to voice your complaints with the station management. Should you not be satisfied with the response or action taken, you can escalate your matter to the Communications Commission at PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Call 2406 7000 or send an email to info@esccom.org.za. For more information, visit www.esccom.org.za.
Welcome back, and moving on with the program, former Senator Sylvia Mthethwa has received recognition as among the 50 most influential African women. This comes amid growing focus on women's economic empowerment as women across Africa continue to face barriers in accessing finance and investment, contributing to a significant gender financing gap. This achievement also places Eswatini at the heart of continental efforts to advance inclusive growth and women's economic participation. She joins us now to reflect on the continental vision for Eswatini's economic empowerment, women's economic empowerment to be more specific. Good afternoon, Sylvia. Thank you very much for your time. So we also understand that you were appointed as Vice President for the 50 most influential women in Africa, among other African women that have shown impeccable leadership. What does this recognition mean to you, and how do you think it then affects or influences or shapes, rather, your responsibility going forward?
Thank you very much for having me. It means I'm accountable to over 600 million African women in the continent. We are aware that women control only 1 to 3% of global wealth, despite being 50% of the population. This recognition demands I use my platform to dismantle that gap, so that the next generation of women entrepreneurs must face fewer barriers than I did.
Which moments in your journey, Sylvia, would you say have defined your leadership and the impact that you have or carry today?
Actually, at age 6, I started selling door to door, and entrepreneurship became my identity. Progress Stationery was my first company, and I have built a multi-million-dollar business over 2 decades, creating jobs for dozens of Eswatini. In Parliament, I realized that constructive change requires women in policy-making spaces. And in public speaking, when I shared my story, I watched young people's faces transform with possibility. One woman's testimony can reshape another woman's belief in what's possible.
There's a saying, train them young, and from your response right now, you've got quite the experience, saying that you actually started selling from the age of 6. Given that much experience, how do you define meaningful leadership and influence in Africa today?
Actually, I use 3 measures to define meaningful leadership in influence. 1, economic transformation means creating tangible opportunities for youth unemployment, which exceeds 25% in Africa. Every job created matters. 2, systemic change. Individual success alone isn't enough. Real influence reforms policies and systems. 3, multiplication. Women entrepreneurs with mentors are 2.5 times more likely to succeed. True leadership creates pathways for others.
Locally, the name Sylvia Mthethwa is rather a household name. We've seen you serve as a businesswoman, but we've also seen you, or known you rather, serve as a parliamentarian. How do you hope that your story and this recognition will inspire young women and girls in Eswatini and across the continent?
Actually, Sylvia Mthethwa is a movement. As you know, that I grew up in Msunduza location, My circumstances didn't determine my destiny. I started with nothing and now stand amongst Africa's most influential women on a continent of 1.3 billion people. My inspiration is believe in yourself. Is the greatest asset. Once you believe in yourself, you already have what you need to start with.
The Alliance for Financial Inclusion, together with the African Development Bank, Sylvia, do report that women's businesses in the continent remain rather underfunded. What do you believe are the main causes of the gender financing in the continent?
Actually, the study shows that women receive 2 to 3% of venture capital funding, while representing 50% of entrepreneurs. Structural bias. We know that banks apply criteria that disadvantage women, like women have to have collaterals in order to borrow money from the banks. Financial illiteracy is one of them. Study shows that only 37% of African women have a basic financial literacy. Network exclusion. About 67% of entrepreneurs find funding through personal networks, and women are excluded. Gender discrimination. Lenders view women as higher risk, despite women repaying loans at higher rates than men.
With years of experience in business, I'd like for you to respond to this one on a rather personal level, or somebody who has been in the field or really is aware of what's happening on the ground. What practical actions and collaborations are needed to then close the gender financing gap and expand access to finance for women? Could it be in Eswatini or when you just look at the continent at large?
Okay. Financial institutions reform lending criteria. It shows that every 1 lilangeni lent to a woman generates 1 lilangeni 50 cents in return. On government side, we need to pass protective legislation and invest in women's financial literacy. Investing in women's education returns 10 to 20% in economic growth. On corporate sector, we need to set procurement targets for women-owned businesses. But when it comes to technology, we need to expand digital financial tools because they bypass traditional gatekeepers. Cross-sector collaboration. Countries with coordinated action see 2 times faster progressing in closing the gap.
I have more than once in this very conversation of ours heard you speaking on investing in women's financial literacy, which I find very important in modern day finances. Let's talk about what your challenge would be to the right agencies. What is your call for action for leaders, or to leaders rather, committed to advancing women's financial empowerment in Eswatini, in Africa?
Thank you very much. I think to financial leaders, we need to create women entrepreneur lending programs. It sounds business to me. That's the only way to go. On government side, legislate women's economic rights and fund financial literacy programs. Under corporate leaders, let's source from women-owned businesses and use your procurement power strategically. I think we need to support women. That's all I'm saying. For young women, start now. Don't wait for perfect conditions. I started at 6 years old. That's your starting time, and that's your starting point as well.
My last one to you is, if your recognition among Africa's most influential women becomes part of something bigger or a larger legacy, what do you want your leadership legacy to be in terms of strengthening women's participation in Eswatini's economy? You're well familiar with the business environment, particularly in areas such as enterprise growth, access to capital, and most importantly, job creation.
Okay, I've always said I want to be remembered. I always said I want to be remembered as a woman who served with integrity, led with compassion, and used her voice to uplift others. Women who opened doors, challenged norms, and left footprint of impact across Africa. Ultimately, I want my legacy to be one of empowerment, justice, and hope. So I encourage women, wherever they are, that let's start working hard. Let's stand up and do something different. Let's prove to the world that we are capable as women.
Fair enough, Sylvia. In the interest of time, we'll leave you here. Thank you very much for talking to us. That was former Senator Sylvia Mteto talking to us about her recognition as one of 50 most influential women in Africa. Market View continues after this. We're back with in-house economist Zanele Sibia.
Those that are in pain must forget all the problems they have. Because the things of the earth have got no answer. But the answer that we have is all the morning. When I'm preaching here, I'm preaching to myself. I receive the Holy Spirit.
I declare that a turnaround is coming my way.
Turnaround is coming in my life.
Hello to all the viewers of Eswatini TV in the kingdom and beyond. Eswatini TV is regulated by the Eswatini Communications Commission through the Broadcasting Code and Broadcasting Guidelines. Under these instruments, the station commits to broadcasting information and news that have been fact-checked, programs and content in respectful language with no elements of hate speech, violence or sexual activity. If you hear any unsuitable content on this channel, you have a right to voice your complaints with the station management. Should you not be satisfied with the response or action taken, you can escalate your matter to the Communications Commission at PO Box 7811 Babani. Call 2406 7000 or send an email to info@esccom.org.za. For more information, visit www.esccom.org.za.
Welcome back. You're still watching Market View now. Our final segment of the show, we're joined by in-house economist Zanele Sibia. Good afternoon, Mrs. Sibia. Thank you very much for your time. So oil still playing above at least around the $100 per barrel. What are markets now making of this rather prolonged energy shock? It's not even a shock at this point. More of a crisis.
No, thank you, Notsile, and a good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me in studio. So as you rightly pointed to, the price of Brent crude now approaching the $105 per barrel mark, and that is somehow sending some shockwaves to markets. But what we've noted is markets are somehow penduluming from lows, basically flatlining, meaning markets have, gotten used to this uncertainty. However, with Brent crude, I think it's largely driven by the stalling in the talks between Iran and the U.S. So now that somehow sends a premium on the contract on the futures contract for oil. So that's what we are seeing playing out. But starting with the U.S. markets, what we note there is we expected markets to do relatively well because we are
waiting for the Magnificent Seven. So those are the biggest tech stocks in the US to post their earnings. But, there is the case between Elon Musk and OpenAI, and overall fears on the spending on, artificial intelligence and whether it is going to get, commercialized and start making those profits. So that's what markets are reflecting. So, starting in the US, what we note is the Dow Jones Industrial Average is a bit down today, losing to 62.92 points in today's trade, largely driven by the fact that the Dow Jones Industrial Average relies largely on oil, and then the stalling in the talks between Iran and the US has magnified impacts on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 are somehow positing gains. But what we're seeing is a basic flatlining on the Nasdaq. I was sitting at 50.5 points. So if you look at the numbers we had yesterday, this is just a recovery back to where we were yesterday. And in the S&P 500, we are seeing an all-time record there, largely driven by the fact that there is a bit of positive sentiments in the market, and also, the Magnificent Seven, and, we are waiting in earnings season right now. So it continues to thrive, and it contains a lot of those recession-proof type of stocks there in the S&P 500. And then moving on to London and the greater Eurozone, again, we are seeing a flatlining with a dip in the FTSE 100. So London is really feeling the pinch. Remember, yesterday we were almost at the 400 mark, but today we are down to the 10,367 mark. So now that shows that London is reacting to the surge in the price of oil. And then the DAX in Germany, again, basically flatlining on the 24,000 mark, showing some slight gains in today's trade. Now, that's on the backdrop of the fact that, Germany is expected to borrow around 200 million euros to support their budget. And now that sends a bit of some positive sentiments into the markets. But then also at the same time, it brings about, caution, and also given what is happening around Brent crude oil. France, there below yesterday's close, trading at 8,163.74 in today's trade, and that's largely driven by the price of Brent crude oil getting back to that 104 mark, approaching the 105 mark, which was a threshold that markets were using. And you'd see that once it gets above the 105 marks, then markets tend to retreat. In Asia, we're seeing, around the Bank of Japan being cautious and holding on to the interest rate, holding it constant. Now that causes a dip, and then you compound that with interest rate fears. So we've seen, the Nikkei there has lost 619.9 points in today's trade. China and Hong Kong there losing 245 points, almost respectively. Now that's largely due to the fact that what we are seeing there in China and Hong Kong are those fears around the oil price boom, and also around the fears around technology and artificial intelligence. In South Africa today, what we are seeing again is another dip, largely driven by the performance of the miners there, with steel production showing some signs of a dip, while diamonds and gold are continuing to be on an upward surge. And then in terms of Eswatini Stock Exchange, we've not seen any visible change. And then in terms of the commodities and the currencies, what we're seeing is, gold continues to take a dip, which shows that markets are a bit stable now. They've internalized the oil risk, and overall, what we are seeing is gold back on that 4,765 type of level. And in terms of Brent crude oil, we've already stated quite a lot around, the price of Brent crude are sitting at 104.48 in today's trade because of those stalling talks. In terms of the currency, we're seeing relative weaknesses across the board, with, the Lilangeni trading at 16.59 against the dollar, at 19.4 against the euro, and one Lilangeni now gives you 9.62 in terms of the Japanese yen, largely driven by the drawback in the mining sector and the relative jitteriness on the South African market around the price of oil. Thank you, Notile.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bia, in-house economist Saneless Bia, sharing or rather breaking down some of the latest on today's trade. Otherwise, this has been the Tuesday edition of Market View. For myself and the team, thank you for staying with us. Until the next edition, bye-bye.